It's awful quiet. Do I have any audio?
Good morning, folks online. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, good morning. I was expecting Will to be talking, but I saw I was missing something there, Will.
Why, thank you for that.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Time being 10:02 a.m. We will call this FTLAC meeting to order. We appreciate everyone being here this morning. So we've got people in the room. We've got quite a few of our board members as well as others online, which I appreciate very much. So let's start with introductions. We're going to start at the table here, and then we'll go to the other side of the room, and we'll also go online. So I am Tillamook County Commissioner Dave Yamamoto. I am chair of FTLAC. And let's go this way.
Mike Wilson, State Forest Division Chief. Good morning, everyone.
Mike Buffo, Senior Forest Economist, Mason Bruce and Gerard.
Good morning, Justin Buttress, Policy Analyst in the State Forest Division.
Jody Kroon, Planning Coordinator, State Forest Division.
I'm Todd Harum, Forest Resource Analyst with State Forests.
Brandon Persinger, Natural Resources for the Association of Oregon Counties and the Executive Director for the Council of Forest Trustland Counties.
Courtney Bangs, Clatsop County Commissioner.
Policy Council for Manufacturing.
And now let's go online. And I am just going to start at the upper left-hand corner and work clockwise around. So Kevin.
Good morning, Kevin Cameron, Marion County Commissioner.
Margaret.
Margaret Magruder, Columbia County Commissioner. Good morning.
Good morning. Will.
Will Tucker, Lynn County Commissioner, and good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock.
Well, maybe where you are. David. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Scar.
Good morning, Commissioner Scar, Tillamook County, and it is morning here.
It is. Thank you, David.
Good morning, David Lovell, Lane County Commissioner.
And Chair Kelly. Oh, I believe you're muted.
Okay, Jim Kelly, Chair, Board of Forestry. Glad to see so many of you being able to meet in person. That's a great accomplishment now.
It is. And I'm having trouble reading that. Is it Colleen?
It is. Good morning, Colleen Kaiser, State Forest Planning Manager.
Thank you very much. Nancy. Oh, Nancy, I believe you're muted.
Good morning, Nancy Wise, Benton County Commissioner.
Thank you so much. And Casey. Casey.
Okay, got it.
There you go.
Morning, everyone. It's Casey Miller, Lincoln County Commissioner, and pleasure to see everyone today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Do appreciate it so much. Have we missed anyone? Oh, do we have anyone on the phone?
Well, we do have Commissioner Mordhorst is also online from Polk County.
Commissioner Mordhorst, there you are. Lyle, can you introduce yourself?
Just trying to figure out my computer to get it to catch up. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Lyle Waters, Polk County Commissioner.
Thank you for being here. Can you see, don't have my glasses on, so can you see anyone else there on the right-hand side? So if we have a phone having joined us, if you would like to introduce yourself, please do so now. And you are muted, and I'm not sure that you may, oh, there you go.
This is Tim Freeman. I'm on the phone today. Thank you.
Hey, good
Douglas
morning,
County.
Tim. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, I think we've got everyone. So let's start with public comment. Do we have any public? Let's start in the room. Any public comment in the room? Please, why don't you come up and use this microphone right here in the corner? Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to provide some public comment today. It's been a little while since I addressed the committee. So my name is Laura Wilkeson. I'm the State Forest Policy Director for Hampton Lumber. Based on some of the slides from the previous FTLAC meeting and on your agenda today, it seems like you're going to be getting some information about the different FMP modeling options that the department is looking at. And I just wanted to make some comments on a few of those options just based on the information that's been shared so far. So there's the extended rotation length a model there. We've consistently made our thoughts known on extended rotations and the disastrous consequences that those could have for Oregon sawmills. So I won't go into that too much, but I do want to make a few points about even flow versus departure, which seems to be an option on these different models. So even flow management is premised on the idea of consistent harvest volumes over time. But absent a perfect distribution of age classes, which the current FMP departed from decades ago, managing at a consistent harvest volume can result in large management distortions where merchantable wood might be deferred to a harvest at a much later date. Even flow strategies also fail to account management needs, such as disease and stunted stands like we see throughout ODF's ownership. An overriding goal of even flow can result in bad outcomes for the forest and for rural communities. While we generally favor a steady and predictable volume of timber from state lands over time, we also strongly believe that ODF lands require more aggressive management in the short term. We should not be filling a shortfall several decades from now by delaying much needed treatments. ODF must move on to address the very real and extensive forest health issues on ODF state lands, and that will require a departure. We should not be, with that, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the issue that is so pressing today over modeling is because of the HCP, which has been spectacularly inexpensive draft, and it really comes at the expense of rural communities. In our view, before we start parsing out these management strategies, we should really focus on revising that HCP to make it significantly more lands available for management. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that very much. Tyler.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Tyler Ernst.
To my knowledge, OFIC doesn't typically come before this committee to provide public testimony, but I wanted to take just a couple minutes this morning to comment on the recent legal developments that bear on the department's continued work to frame a viable habitat conservation plan for Westside State Forest. I would assume everyone in this room is well aware that the lawsuit brought by environmental plaintiffs challenging the department's management activities on state lands and the impacts of those activities on the coho salmon was settled on March 21st. And you are likely all also aware of the rough terms of that settlement agreement, that it requires the department beginning in fiscal year 2024 to implement the aquatic habitat provisions of the draft HCP and then to continue to do so until the earlier of fiscal year 2028 or the approval of a habitat conservation plan by the federal services. Now, some may assert that this long expected outcome ends debate about whether the state should move forward with the current HCP as drafted and therefore makes the decreased harvest volumes reflected in the recently finalized fiscal year 24-25 IPs definitive. However, this is clearly not the case. Anyone who's been tracking the HCP in detail knows that the additional aquatic protections contemplated in the draft document, though somewhat more expansive than those that the department currently administers, are not the primary driver of the decrease in harvest volume reflected in the IPs. Rather, it's the expansive protections for terrestrial species, not aquatic species, that are having the greatest impact on harvest projections. Nevertheless, even though it is the protections for terrestrial species that are having the larger impacts, it's largely been this lawsuit about the coho salmon and the specter of that lawsuit hanging over the state that has been one of the chief drivers of this process timeline and has led the department and the board to continue doggedly along the path of obtaining approval for the current draft HCP. So in a sense, you could say that the cart has been leading the horse. However, with this settlement, much of this felt pressure, we would hope, has been resolved. I think it clearly has. And the state now knows what it must do to comply with the terms of the agreement and where it has flexibility to take a breath and reconsider the current course. So if this committee is still committed to trying to land the HCP in a place that protects the interests of your local communities by guaranteeing a sustainable yield of timber that is closer to the current 10-year average, we would implore you to ask the board to consider bifurcating the HCP process. Move ahead with the planned aquatic provisions as it must do pursuant to the terms of the settlement agreement, but then take time to reconsider how to frame the protections of upland areas in a more equitable manner. This settlement, whether you agree with it or not, has given the state a window of opportunity to come up with a solution on the much more impactful HCAs, one that works for the trust land counties, that safeguards the economic viability of the industry that operates in your communities, and that provides economic well-being and stability to thousands of families in those communities, and that still provides operational certainty for the department. Finally, I just want to say in closing that when the impacts of harvest projections are discussed, oftentimes it's discussed or it's brought up how important it is for a viable industry to be operating within your counties, within these communities, that industry is the lifeblood of local communities, and surely there's truth to that. I also want to acknowledge, though, and OFIC is, as an industry representative, is committed to working with the counties to try to land this in a positive place, because we also recognize that for the industry to function, we need vibrant communities and the support that those provide. Our employees need schools, well-funded schools where they can send their kids. They need well-funded emergency service departments. They need, good roads to drive to and from work and to and from the store and to and from school. And so we are committed to working with the trust land counties to try to ensure that these communities stay vibrant and stay viable. With that, I'll end my comments. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. Do we have anyone else that would like to provide testimony in the room? Let's go online. So first of all, I want to make sure that everyone realizes that Craig Pope has joined us, Polk County. Craig, you want to introduce yourself?
Morning, everybody. Yes, Craig Polk, Polk County Commissioner. Thank you.
Good morning. And just a note to all the commissioners online, any commissioner at any time, you have comments, questions, concerns, please just get online and speak your piece. At this point, do we have anyone online that would like to provide public comment? Seeing none, we will move on in the agenda, and I'm great that we have Chair Kelly with us this morning. Chair Kelly, would you like to provide some hold on just a moment.
Retake.
Sure.
Hold on a second, Jim. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry.
Folks that are not in the current participant here, if you have comment, you need to use the raise hand function to let Samantha know. Maybe we'll give a few seconds for folks to do that and see if we have anybody. Also, it looks like, is there another commissioner there? Megan McKibben? Is it? Oh, okay, okay.
Why don't you introduce yourself? Megan, why don't you
If you want-
introduce yourself? Megan?
Oh, hi, I'm Megan McKibben, Commissioner Willie's staff assistant.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much. Okay, so let's do one more call for anyone that wants to provide public comment. If you do want to provide public comment, please raise your hand and we'll make sure that you get to participate. Anyone? Thank you so much. Chair Kelly, let's go back to you.
All right, thank you. I'm really glad to see such a great attendance for this meeting. I wasn't really going to make any comment, but I do want to take issue with the one thing that was said in the OFIC testimony, and that was the statement that the Coho lawsuit has been the major driver of the HCP process. I certainly don't look at it that way, and I don't think any other board members or the department did. It has always been a factor, something that we needed to be mindful of. But I think what it really did is it represented the ongoing future kinds of potential threats that we without an HCP can face. In other words, other kinds of similar lawsuits. And so, I think there are a whole lot of reasons that I don't need to go back all over why we have pursued and why generally the counties have supported an HCP as well as industry. And it is primarily around future certainty. So just wanted to make that point clear. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. Appreciate that very much. And again, as always, Jim, if you want to make a comment at any time, you certainly don't need to raise your hand. You just pop right in, and of course you can make any comments that you would like as we go through the meeting. Okay. Thank you. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned a couple things. First of all, Vice Chair John Sweet is not able to be with us today. He is a board member of the Ford Family Foundation. And this week and next week, Ford Family Foundation is meeting, trying to figure out ways to give away money. And I think that's terrific. I do. So I want to thank John for everything that he does. Something just slipped my mind. I was going to make, State Forester Mukamoto was also not able to be with us this morning. And he sends his regrets. So let's move on. We're a little ahead of schedule, I think, which is great. Let's move on, and we're going to have a conversation about the status of FMP modeling. And Mike, I'm hoping that's going to include status of maybe where we stand on the IPs.
We can speak to that a little bit as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll just turn it over to you.
All right. Well, here to talk to us about the status of that modeling, we have Todd Heron, who's our forest analyst, and Jody Kroon, who's one of our lead planning staff. So I'll just turn it over to them.
All right, good morning. Morning, everybody. As I introduced myself earlier, my name is Todd Heron. I'm the Forest Resource Analyst with the State Forest Division. And I'm going to give try to keep this brief and high level, but an overview of the status of a project we have underway to review and improve some of our growth and yield estimates as it pertains to the forest planning model. And then, excuse me, when I finish, my colleague Jody Kroon is going to give an update on the overall FMP plant modeling efforts. Let's see. Get this going here. Okay, so what am I going to talk about today? As I mentioned, we have this growth model calibration project that we've undertaken. I'm going to touch on how that relates to the planning model and its components. I'll review the growth model itself a little bit, and then some key recommendations and the calibration methodologies as it stands. Okay, so the brief overview of the project. So growth and yield, we talk about yield tables when we refer to the planning model. Oh, thank you. So yield tables are one of the fundamental inputs to the forest planning model. We use growth models to generate those. And as such, there's a high degree of concern about the validity of those data. There's been some concerns raised about the performance of those models, and so we wanted to reach out, get some external review, bring on some additional capacity to perform that review and provide us with some support there. So let's see. Move on here. Okay, so a brief overview for those that may not be familiar with the planning model as we term it. So this is the kind of the integrated model that we use for assessing management alternatives, implementation plan objectives, et cetera. The model we use is called Patchworks. It's what's called a spatially explicit heuristic, and uses a goal optimization framework to integrate policy constraints and goals, as well as do all the revenue and cost accounting. It integrates detailed spatial data. So these are the resource overlays, all of the GIS data that we maintain to keep track of the important resources on the ground. It also provides, the key linkage to the inventory. The spatial data provides a linkage to the inventory and yield table databases. And then finally, the yield projections themselves provide not only the initial forest inventory estimates that are fed into the model, but also the projections of future biometrics, the volume, biomass, and habitat features that we evaluate within the model. Okay, so again, for growth and yield projections, we use a model called the Forest Vegetation Simulator. This is it's a national framework. It's a growth model that it's not just a single growth model. It's a number of regional variants throughout the continental U.S. and territories and I believe now Alaska. And specifically, we use primarily the what's called the Pacific Northwest Coast variant. There's also a variant for Southern Oregon and South Central Oregon that we use for Klamath and Southwest regions. FVS is an individual tree model, so it estimates the growth and change of individual trees represented by a tree list generated from forest inventory or planting prescriptions. And calibration is anticipated within FVS. So these are the models themselves are fit or developed to represent a wide geographic region. You can see from this slide the PN variant covers a region from the Puget Sound down to Southern Oregon along the coast. So it's expected that there's going to be some local bias and some local discrepancies that need to be addressed. And they provide tools for that. So, fundamentally, why is calibration necessary? number one, it improves the confidence in the planning model outcomes. Knowing the relative certainty embodied in those projections is critical to the usefulness of those outcomes. It minimizes the need for post-processing. So during the verification or validation steps, we occasionally will apply some post-processing corrections that you may be familiar with. We want these growth and yield projections to be consistent with empirical data. So we have plot data on the landscape that we can leverage, and we want to be able to demonstrate that our projections are consistent with those. And then finally, it's fairly well known that FVS tends to overestimate out of the box. So this isn't unique to ODF or other landowners. It's this slide in particular is from a presentation from 2005. So it's been a known issue, and we've wrestled with it ourselves over the years. Okay, so moving on to some of the key recommendations, and maybe I should back up. For this work, we've enlisted the help of Peter Gould, who's a biometrician with Mason, Bruce, and Gerard. He's been a great help in wrestling these models, and unfortunately he was unable to be here today, but I'm going to do my best to convey some of the messages that some of the recommendations he's provided us thus far. The first one being, go ahead and just use his suggestion was to use the PN variant for the North Cascade district as well. In the past, we've used what's called the West Cascade variant. But the West Cascade variant, even though geographically it overlaps, our ownership, the data itself doesn't fit very well. So the West Cascade variant was developed for high elevation stands, primarily above 3,000 feet. In fact, the highlighted numbers there represent or highlight that 60% of the Douglas fir data used to fit the West Cascade variant was from elevations exceeding 3,000 feet. And so on the North Cascade district, we have less than 25% of the acres above 3,000 feet. So fundamentally, the data is better represented by the PN variant. And then additionally, one of the key assumptions in the models are height growth. And the West Cascade variant uses a site index curve to estimate potential height growth. And it uses a curve called the Curtis curve. And which was developed for high elevation Douglas fir. Whereas the PN variant uses what's called the King site curve. And so this graph just represents the discrepancy between those two site index curves, the blue line being King, represented by what's called the Bruce curve, which is a kind of a surrogate for the King curve, but has a better applicable age range. And then the dashed line is the Curtis line. So you can just visually, you can see that the relative to our SLI site measurement trees, the King curve tends to fit better. So combined, and also just using, limiting the number of models that we use simplifies the growth and yield process as well. Okay, so moving on to the calibration steps. In order to calibrate the model, you need data, and unfortunately, as a division, we don't have an internal remeasurement data set. We've talked about, some of the limitations of SLI in the past. One of those limitations is a lack of, temporal utility. There's not a remeasurement cycle with SLI. And the permanent plots that we installed back in 2000, at the beginning of the current FMP implementation, those were never remeasured. And so we just have a lack of this data in hand. But what we do have access to is the forest inventory and analysis data. And so this is the federal national framework for the National Forest Inventory. And this is represented by a hexagonal grid that's draped across, all forest lands in the US, where each plot roughly represents about 6,000 acres per plot. And each one of those plots is remeasured on a 10-year cycle, about 10% each year. And this was, this has been in place since, the 1930s, but it was redesigned around 2000, and we're just starting on the second remeasurement cycle. So there's a significant amount of data, remeasurement data from that first cycle that we can bring to bear. And the FIA program itself has done a lot to make this data available and useful. And specifically, they have what's called the FBS ready databases. And so that's what we're using to do this work. So relative to state forests, we wanted to use data that represented state forests well. Specifically on state forests, what are called the on-grid plots. There are only about 125 plots currently, before our recent densification, that is. So we expanded the search radius to kind of a 3-mile radius around state forests managed lands to bring in some more geographically relevant data. And that amounted to about 398 plots. And then to capture some of the more minor species like noble fir and spruce, extended that search out to pick up another 31 plots. And then Tillamook, because of the unique nature of the management history and fire history there, we analyzed that separately. And that's specifically, there's 31 plots that represent Tillamook, in addition to the other plots. It was kind of an additive process. So these plots were rejected if they had more than 20 square feet of mortality due to cutting, fire, or weather. So that provides a fairly robust and geographically representative data set to do this work. So I'll just briefly touch on the methodology that Peter has been working through. He recognized that so FES is a series of submodels. It has a diameter increment model, a height increment model. It estimates mortality separately, so each one of these submodels can be adjusted or calibrated. And specifically, Peter worked out that the bias, if you will, or the corrections for the diameter increment are different depending on the diameter of the tree. So the first step was to simply grow all of the trees, all of the plots, all of the FIA plots through FVS, through the PN variant, unmodified. So just how does it function out of the box? So this chart represents the 10-year increment on individual trees by diameter class. And so then that can be compared directly to the growth estimates from FIA. And so you can see from this graph that for smaller trees, FIA overestimates the annual or 10-year increment quite substantially, and then tends to underestimate growth on larger trees. So we can use this to then calibrate FVS and hopefully get a more realistic projection of the diameter increment of those trees. So those adjustment factors get applied and then sent back through the model, and you get a this distribution of growth that's more realistic and representative of the FIA plots, FIA data. So that was done for, like I said, for all the districts combined, and then Tillamook was handled slightly differently to get a different adjustment. This was done for diameter increment as well as height increment. Yep.
Sure. I mean, so I see that in the early growth stages, the FVS may overestimate growth, but it seems to catch up with itself later on and during the growth period. Am I reading these charts right?
Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. The diameter increment for smaller trees is being overestimated by FVS. And yeah, so the larger trees, it tends to underestimate growth. So there is, if you want to term it a catch up, I'm not sure what, just the shape of the model curve, if you will,
okay,
is disproportional.
Okay.
Todd, can you tell us like about at what size class you see in your harvest?
Oh, okay.
How far are trees making it through this curve?
Yeah, okay, so I would say about the middle of the curve is maybe middle. So the 24-inch size class or so, roughly about in there. Let's see. Okay, so that's the diameter increment calibration. I don't have a similar graph for the height increment, but it's similar in nature. So some of the other things that were looked at is a key driver in FVS is the mortality equation. So that it grows the trees or estimates the growth of the trees first, then applies any silvicultural prescriptions that you embed in the model, and then mortality is applied. And so this what's called the maximum stand density index is a key driver of that mortality estimate. And out of the box, FVS uses a really high number for whatever reason. It assumes that stands can reach an incredibly high density. So we already have some stand density index adjustments that we've applied in the past, and Peter's it feels like those are realistic and a good numbers to go forward with. Probably no changes there. Another recommendation is around green trees. So currently the way we model our regeneration prescriptions is we include green trees along with the planted trees in a single growth projection, but that has this very disproportionate effect on the planted trees. So the recommendation is to look at growing those separately. So the green trees would be handled separately from the planted trees and then combined in the yield table post-processing step. Some other things we need to consider is the stocking of our sites. Not all acres are stocked equally. We plant 400 trees per acre. That's the expected planting density, but that's not uniform across all sites. And there's various site conditions that can affect that. So we need to take that into consideration. Okay, so I don't have a lot of results at this meeting, so this is just kind of an update of where we're at. And so the next steps are a final report. Peter's working on some finalizing that report and any putting any finishing touches on the recommendations. We have new excuse me. We do have new reforestation prescriptions generated for the FMP modeling process to better represent HCA management as well as the general stewardship lands. And so we'll be integrating those and running them through with this calibration as well to see how they fare. And then we'll integrate this calibration work, the recommendations into the yield table projection process. Generate new yield tables for the planning model, and then finally do the validation and field review through the MSR model solution review and other internal review steps. So then I just wanted to touch on validation. Clearly, we need to demonstrate that this work is valid and reasonable. And the best thing we can do is to use the empirical data that we have available, and a key data source for that is the stand level inventory measured data. So we kind of wring our hands over SLI sometimes, but at its core, the measurement data is sound, and it's a good representation of how the trees were when they were measured. And it gives a reasonable approximation of what could be expected from future stand development. And so this chart just represents the points represent individual SLI measured stands at the time it was measured, so there's no growth projection involved. And the curves just represent the percentile of the distribution of that point cloud. And so we'll use this data to help gauge the relative to gauge how well the calibrations work relative to the SLI data, excuse me. And then also we can look back at the FIA plot data themselves. So the calibration was done using the increment data, but we can also look at the plot totals as well. And then the other thing that we can bring to bear, and we're closing in on here, is our enhanced forest inventory. So this is the work that we're doing to integrate LiDAR with our forest inventory to get a better better wall-to-wall estimate of forest conditions. And at least preliminary, this looks promising when it's compared to the scaled data. So what this chart here represents the excuse me, the predicted volume from the EFI, the enhanced forest inventory, the draft version of it anyway, represented by the blue dots and the line, as well as the cruise data used for timber sale cruising, represented by the orange line. And then on the y-axis is the actual scaled volume that was cut out from these timber sales. So each one of these points represents a clear cut that was felled after the date of the EFI data collection. So point being is that the EFI is a reasonable representation of the merchantable volume on the landscape. And so we can use this to help validate the SLI grow forward, or the initial inventory within the represented by the yield tables themselves before they, or as they go into the model. And then finally, we'll give it additional field review to make sure that our staff and foresters are feel comfortable with the results. And then finally, I think that's finally, yep. Going forward, this all needs to be, thought of in the context of an adaptive management framework. This is kind of a continuous improvement process that we need to, consider as new data and new information from research and becomes available. There are researchers working on growth models. We're members of a couple co-ops that deal with growth models, and so we'll be keeping tabs on all that work and looking to improve our own projections going forward. And then finally, the FIA plot densification. Back in 2020, we had the opportunity to partner with PNW and Region 6 to densify our FIA plots. So like I said, we started with 125 on-grid plots. Those have all been remeasured at least once. With the densification, we've added another 300 plus plots, and those have been installed, and they're currently, it'll be 10 years or so before we get complete remeasurement, but those are being remeasured on an annual basis. 10% of those plots every year will be remeasured. So we'll be able to bring that additional data to bear over time. So with that, I field any questions, do my best, and then I'll hand it off to Jody for a modeling project update.
Before we ask for questions from the rest of the group, let me ask some of my stupid questions first. So you're saying that you don't have, it's too early for results from your modeling project. When do you anticipate having more detailed results?
I think Jody's going to touch on the modeling project. As far as the growth and yield calibration, I think the results of that will come out at the same time. We're hoping to kind of get that all wrangled and together.
So in comparison to past FMPs, how different are the I don't even know how to word this. How different are the modeling parameters that you've used, that ODF has used in the past updates to the forest management plan? I mean, I consider what you're doing now to be pretty new, and I don't know if that's the case. So can you talk about differences that in the way that you're calculating things today in today's FMP update versus previous FMP updates?
Yeah, I can try to touch on that a bit. For past efforts, it's been I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of a process of increasing precision or increasing continuous improvement, right? So prior to the current modeling efforts, the calibrations were pretty qualitative, pretty gross. It was, do the projections, match expectations. There wasn't a lot of data brought to bear to do those calibrations early on. 10 years ago or so, forget the exact time frame, we did some work to look at radial increment data from our initial permanent plot installation. So we had some increment data that was useful, but it was still a fairly big gross hammer that was used to calibrate those models. We didn't have enough data to do the detailed diameter class increment, for instance. So some other things have stayed the same, like the maximum SDI, we've adjusted that early on, just throwing out a number. It was for Douglas fir, it was like 600. We revised that based on plot data. We revised that down to, I believe it's 475 is the maximum stand density number that's used now for Douglas fir. But fundamentally, those are similar calibrations, it's just a refinement. But the bigger change is the diameter increment. Before it was it's called a basal area increment, so it would just ratchet all the trees up or down depending on the kind of uniformly. So all trees grew more or all trees grew less. So it was not terribly sophisticated. And then this of course is at the individual tree level will be more detailed and give a better estimate of the growth at the individual tree level, which hopefully will result in a more reliable growth projection overall.
That is always our hope.
And maybe I'll just weigh in
Sure,
here
please.
for a second, if it's okay. Basically, we've used FVS ever since the Harvest and Habitat Project, and that wrapped up went from like 2003, 2006, right, to try and dial that in. And as Todd, for all the things that Todd's saying, just increasing the precision of those estimates around that. And I did want to make one thing kind of clear here is we established permanent plots in 2001, right? And that was all on our own. However, I would say the number of plots and how they're laid out is probably real similar to what we're doing now in our partnership with FIA. When the Great Recession hit, we did not do the second remeasurement of those permanent plots that we had installed. And so in terms of having this good increment data versus that better increment data we have now, we didn't have that previously. For instance, when we did the previous IPs. And so, this is now better because FIA at the same time, they had around the same time, they had redesigned their plots as Todd mentioned, and now they've got a full remeasurement cycle on those. And so by just using that data, and then in addition to that, teeing ourselves up for the future, we have partnered with FIA to densify the plot network on our ownership specifically so that we can get specific answers there. And that's really one of the key drivers of our forest inventory along with LiDAR going forward. And so it really helps build a lot more precision into the growth and yield piece of the modeling. And that's the fundamental underpinning. Well, one of the fundamental underpinnings of our modeling is just getting the growth and yield correct. And then the other is, of course, the actual harvest scheduling itself, which is a different effort, right? It consumes the yield tables that have been made through this FVS modeling to do the harvest scheduling function. And now Jody is going to give more of an update on the modeling process overall. So thanks for letting me butt in.
No, let's ask for other questions, Commissioner.
I think my question's pretty simple. What is the projection for finishing the FMP and the projection for approval? Because we're not gonna, as a commissioner, in regards to how much production we're gonna have in our forest, I'm not, like, this doesn't tell me anything in regards to the end game of what we're going to be able to do outside of the HCAs in our forest. The most recent update in the goals I saw caused great concern for me, just in regards to, I feel like there's going to be more restrictions in the state forest outside of the HCAs than there currently are restrictions going on under the current FMP. And so I'm just kind of waiting for the end game here or the end result and wondering when we're going to get the bad news.
Again, I think I heard that Jody is going to be providing information on some of that. Thank you for the question. Anyone like to address any of the issues that Commissioner Banks brought up at this point? Other questions in the room? Oh. No, please go ahead. Yeah, if you want to.
Oh, I was just gonna say, once Jody wraps her presentation, we can circle back on any of those questions around timing.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just maybe a follow-up on your question. It sounds like, Todd, that you have more data now and you're able to do better calibration than the past. And I'm curious what, in terms of the yields, in terms of volume terms, if that's resulting in, how do the old yields compare to the new yields in kind of volume terms through a typical rotation?
So we haven't, this calibration work hasn't gone through the yield table process entirely yet. One of the key points that are observations is just related to the culmination timing. Maybe that'll help. In the previous yield tables, one of the things we recognized is that there was this problem with early culmination, or appeared to be early culmination. So, and what that means is that stands, as they go through this biological growth process, and they reach a pinnacle of growth, and that's called culmination. So it's when the average annual increment plateaus. And so, typically for Douglas fir, that's kind of expected to be 70, 80, 90 or more years. We were seeing culmination in those yield tables closer to age 50, which just didn't seem right, and wasn't really consistent with the plot data that we had. So I think that'll be kind of a key outcome, is that the culmination age will be more realistic. As far as the overall volume output, I guess it's not clear at this point whether or not it's going to be more or less or about the same. But I think the main point is that the projections themselves are going to be more reliable in terms of their timing.
Mike, before you move on, you brought up something that I'm curious about. You talk about early culmination, pinnacle of growth. Does that relate to the maximum amount of carbon sequestered?
I mean, it's certainly related. The biological maximum is the age at which trees are, or the stand is sequestering the most carbon, putting on the most biomass, generating the most volume on an annual increment basis. Average annual increment. There's periodic annual and there's mean annual. We're talking about the mean annual increment. So the average growth over the life of that forest. And so whether it's biomass, carbon, or volume, those are all closely related in terms of just the culmination age.
In layman's terms, basically, you're saying the sweet spot is still about 80 years.
I think that's, yeah. I'm saying.
Mike, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, thanks. The results you showed for diameter increment, that's for all of state lands, is that correct? Or
that particular slide, I'm not sure which data set that came from that was represented, but yes, it's the results are consistent for all state lands. Yeah.
I was just curious about Tillamook because that was analyzed separately.
Yeah, Peter didn't provide a slide that was separate. So that was, I think that was all lands, but Tillamook had a similar outcome, but the coefficients were the scaling, the multipliers were slightly different.
Okay. And then going also back to that slide, there was a question about whether the trees catch up. There's kind of like slower growth at I can't say younger because those were diameter and they're smaller trees and not necessarily younger trees, but you have slower growth on the smaller trees and then somewhat higher growth on the larger trees. But whether or not the growth on the larger trees makes up for that slower growth in the smaller trees kind of depends on how long how long the trees are growing through those classes. Is that right? So And then in terms of volume, there's of course diameter, but then height as well as, taper issues there. So do you have, it sounds like you don't yet have any information on volume, but can you speculate on what those calibrations mean in terms of volume?
Speculate. I guess it's a little difficult to speculate. I think that, maybe the key takeaway from those graphs is that, FVS was overestimating growth on the small trees. And so essentially what it was doing was, if you correlate small trees with young trees, then it's basically saying that young trees were growing faster than they should have been. So in terms of volume growth, they were accumulating too much volume early on and not enough volume later on in the age.
And were those yield curves the ones from the IP, or did the IP use different yield curves altogether in the modeling?
Oh, you mean the
sort of I'll call it the uncalibrated FBS. Maybe that's not fair representation.
Oh, no.
The uncalibrated FBS, is that what was used in the IP, or?
No, that chart that I displayed was just FVS without any calibration. So the yield tables that were used for the IP and the HCP comparative analysis work, those did include calibrations, but like I said, kind of the more sledgehammer approach.
Okay. Do you know how those compare though with the, in terms of that young growth rate versus older growth rate? Compared to these newer calibrations?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at that specifically. But again, those calibrations were, they affected all trees equally, more or less. And so I would expect that those bars would just be higher or lower uniformly.
One last question. It has to do with the field review. I know with the IP, there was modeling work, and then there was region review or district review, and then kind of changes in the IP itself. Now with this new, presumably more accurate calibration, when you go through the district review phase, how will you balance the input from the districts with the numerical plot data that sort of a more robust calibration method that you've used?
Yeah, so one of the key things that I've highlighted a couple of times is I really, so the last time we went through this, and the districts always do a model solution review on the harvest schedule that we put out. And part of that review is, do the volumes per acre look right? And so to the districts, they did not look right. And I fully trust their judgment there. But it puts them in a spot of then taking the end result and trying to make these cuts, right, at just how much less it is. What we're trying to change with this refined calibration is get their eyes on the yield tables and say, oh, okay, so we have the stuff per acre right for the different types of stands that we're dealing with here. So that problem solved and out of the way and handled at a more refined scale that really is more fair to them and generates a better thing. And then we don't have to do, as Todd mentioned, the post-processing piece, where they can really focus on the harvest schedule that the model comes up with and say, okay, is because the key question, one of the key questions to the district in the model solution review is, how well can you implement this? It's like, here's the units that the model picked. Can you do this? Can you accomplish this? Which is really more of a management question than it is, a growth question. Yep. So we'll get their eyes on that earlier in the process.
So to summarize, so I understand, it's just the districts will be asked less about growth and yield and more about kind of the spatial configuration, access issues, that kind of thing, whether it complies with green up rules, as opposed to say what the growth is on the stands, and that'll be more numerical from this.
Yeah, it will be from the source. We're still going to have them look at the yield tables themselves and say, oh, okay, yeah, these yields look reasonable, but kind of dispense with that question earlier in the process so that we don't have to constantly post-process the final result of the harvest schedule. Yep.
Sure. Okay. Jody. Sorry. Oops. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
Todd. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Jody Kroon. I'm a planning coordinator with the State Forest Division. The division has been tasked with providing several different modeling scenarios for the Board of Forestry.
Speak into the microphone a
Am I
little bit
too-
more. We're having trouble hearing.
The division has been tasked with providing several different modeling scenarios for the Board of Forestry to aid discussions around the Forest Management Plan and draft Habitat Conservation Plan. The table you see on the screen shows the different scenarios we have planned, their goals, and how the volume may be distributed over the lifetime of the Forest Management Plan. Even flow means sustainable harvest where the expected volume remains constant over the lifetime of the plan, while the departure allows for more volume to be harvested at the beginning of the model and then the volume declines later. One scenario we will prepare is a model run that maximizes volume with an even flow distribution. For reference, this was the modeling scenario used to inform the current forest management plan. We will also provide a scenario for maximizing net present value and a scenario that maximizes volume with a focus on extended rotation ages. The volume in both of these scenarios will have an even flow distribution. The last scenario will be maximizing net present value with a departure similar to the scenario provided for the comparative analysis modeling done for the Habitat Conservation Plan. All of these scenarios will be run at both a georegion scale and a district scale. The georegions being used for modeling are the North Coast georegion, which includes the Astoria, Tillamook, and Forest Grove districts, and the Valley georegion, which includes the West Oregon and North Cascade districts. The Western Lane district is both a district and a georegion. We are currently working through the calibrations Todd just described and putting together the model with the different scenarios. Once the work has been completed, I'll begin scheduling district reviews for the calibrated growth and yields and the different model runs. And we're planning on having that completed towards the end of June. And with that, please direct any questions you have for me to Mike Wilson.
So I just want to say I recognize that the work being done here is not so what I have to say isn't a reflection on how I feel about the employees of ODF. I'm just going to put that out there. So we have extended rotations up here. And why do we not have modeling scenarios for shortened rotations?
So we do. Anytime you maximize net present value, you are working towards a shorter rotation.
Okay, so when you're maximizing net present value, are you doing that under the current forest management plan, or are you doing that taking into account only the PFA and your take avoidance process?
No, all of these scenarios are being modeled under the HCP for the new forest management plan. And so in terms of the volume flow for what's on the available acres, for each of these, the model is basically the decider on that. It will come up with a solution that produces either the maximum volume, maximum net present value. Extended rotations is a little bit more of a difficult one to model. It's like how extended then becomes the question. But so there's going to be some short rotation outputs from this on the net present value runs.
Okay, so I guess I'm just still asking for both of the bookends in regards to the state forest. You are constantly providing me worst case scenarios right and left, but you're never providing an option outside of the HCP. And I really feel like in this conversation, we still need to see how productive our forest could be outside of the HCP, taking into account the current PFA and your take avoidance that you currently use. We have half of the conversation here, and there's still the off chance that this HCP doesn't go through. So we're just, stacking all of the cards against ourselves if by that off chance, the whole house of cards collapses. And so I just, it's hard to ask people to make a decision if they don't have the whole picture. And I feel like half the picture is still missing.
I appreciate the comment, and I'll go back to your questions earlier about timing. Obviously, this work, we had it targeted to come up with all of this, all of these results by the end of June. That ain't gonna happen, quite frankly. And we are recognizing, that we need to have both the growth and yield and the harvest schedule modeling correct. So some of this will be available by the end of June, but quite frankly, we are going to be pushing that out in order to get all the scenarios. And the reason we want to do that is the board needs to be able to, one, look at the decision space with these scenarios with the HCP, but then looking at that with the HCP, seeing, is this not enough? Or for some objective or another. So that they can have the full discussion. So that's an important piece there. And these are things that basically the board has expressed an interest in, the economic returns, and then also there's been some quite a bit of conversation around longer rotations as well. But, at the end of the day, the board's going to look at a maximum economic return in the context of the current draft HCP. And, that's going to be a conversation for them to have as well, as they have intoned.
How extended of a rotation age are you guys addressing in these modeling scenarios?
So I don't know if that's actually been arrived at yet in terms of a number of years, because it varies by site, but I'll let Jody and Todd.
Yeah, we haven't figured that out yet. We'll run the maximum net present value and the maximum volume runs first and see where they are, and then we'll see how far we have to increase to get that longer rotation age. So for instance, it may be, for example, it could be 20 years over whatever the middle run is.
So I'm just going to verbalize a concern in that scenario, and that concern being that all of the HCAs took all of our older class trees off of the ability to be harvested. And so we would be looking at decades of no harvest if we're going to be waiting for trees to mature to a longer rotation age.
Thanks for the comment. I'll go ahead and weigh in on that a little bit. And you're right. If we were only considering the available acres outside. Now, the extended rotation will be there, and it'll show whatever decrease in economic returns that come along with that. And so that's a part of the, that's part of the conversation, right? Where do you want to land on these things? And then but the other thing is the total carbon objective that would come out. And this really has to be the conversation, is the entire landscape. And so the habitat conservation areas will certainly be an area of carbon sequestration and carbon storage as well. So it's not just about looking at the available acres. The broader conversation is, what's the total carbon outcome for this? And, quite frankly, at least from the staff perspective, we think the HCAs are going to do a bang up job of carbon storage over time. And so it's important to present the entire picture of the landscape and not just focus in on what's carbon storage on the harvested acres.
So what's being brought up is even flow versus departure also in this conversation. Am I correct?
Departure scenario, yes.
Okay, so when I look at even flow versus departure, I'm looking at departure being like a payday loan. Basically stealing from our future selves when it comes to how we fund county government and how our small districts fund themselves. And so I feel like both conversations are like slapping lipstick on a pig and then being asked to still kiss the pig. And I'm not going to kiss the HCP pig no matter what. But when we have these two choices, one literally stealing from our future self in regards to departure, and then The other one being even flow and not being able to keep our large diameter mills running. Like the options are not great. I mean, honestly, no matter what, we're going to have our large diameter mills probably end up closing down in the ACCP discussion, just because they won't have enough logs to keep business running. And so, but it's just the timing of when they close. Like that's the conversation we're having, is the timing of when all the bad stuff is going to happen for my community. And so when asked my opinion regarding even flow or departure, both suck. I don't want to give an opinion because both are horrible outlooks for the people in my community. And I just, we're going to find difficulty in the state of Oregon milling anything over private industry aged trees, just period. And so I'm just looking at Oregon's economy. I'm looking at the economy in my community, but I'm also looking at like, where are you going to find mills to log trees coming off that are even 80 years old at the point that we're at? Because like you won't find somewhere to mill your trees. I mean, I guess the purchasers won't find places to mill your trees. And so the expense of transport will cut into the economic return that is coming to my community and the people that are working there. And then followed in with, my concern is there going to even be enough people to harvest living in my community at that point. And so I guess I'm just addressing the departure versus the even flow conversation, and neither conversation is great. And I keep hearing people trying to applaud this thought of certainty as this winning outcome for me and my community, when it's a certainty of future bankruptcy. It's a certainty of increase in houselessness. It's a certainty of increase in drug use. It's a certainty of the poverty level and this in my community. And it is a certainty of an increase of social services that are going to be needed to care for the people that lose their jobs from a community that is also being defunded at the same time. And so all of that certainty and that word is actually really raises the hair on the back of my neck, because it is certainty of a plan that has been written under, yay, we need an HCP, but it certainly has driven the future of my community into the gutter. And I look at the economic future. And if anybody's ever traveled to destination locations in other countries, they'll see that the front-facing community that you visit is beautiful. But the second you drive out of that front-facing portion of that community, it is devastation. And that is what we're looking at for my community, because that's all we're going to have left. You're talking about a community that is over 80% forest. What land base do we have to create other economic opportunity in my community?
Thank you. We all know that Clatsop County is going to be hit hardest by this HCP, although all trust counties will be affected. Todd, you had your hand up, wanted to say something?
Well, I had to go back to the, the extended rotation piece. Just maybe a point of clarification about how it would be implemented in the model. Like Jody said, we don't know what those extended rotations would be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But it would be implemented in the model, it wouldn't be implemented as a strict no harvest cutoff age, like a minimum harvest age threshold. It would be implemented in such a way that the model would be directed to achieve a goal of longer rotation. So over time, it would, the average age of the harvested trees would increase. So it wouldn't be an immediate, no harvest scenario, if that's of any.
Thank you for that. Okay. Hold on, please. Hang on. Mike, do you have something?
Yeah,
Please.
I have a couple questions.
Yes, please.
Just one question, just on the grid of scenarios. I think it was the last FTLIC meeting, we saw a grid with 8. So they had the geo region and the district flow unit scenario, are you still considering those as well?
Yes, we'll be looking at the district level, which is our current planning unit, spatial unit. And then we'll also be looking at the geographic regions that were identified in the HCP, where the North Coast is essentially treated as one region. The West Oregon District and North Cascade is another, and then as Jody mentioned, Western Lane and South, as one. And it's basically to look at the differences there and what's implementable and what's not. Now, not all of the scenarios may get treated at all those levels. Basically, we do want to look at the maximizing volume. The first scenario at both of those scales, because maximizing even flow of volume is, our current practice at the district level. And the same thing then for the geographic level, look at the difference there. We do want to look at what that departure looks like at the geographic level. But some of the basic, takeaways from this can be answered by doing the geographic level modeling for some of those other scenarios. And it's kind of like, okay, we get it, how the spatial will probably affect that. And so, the matrix would end up with a total of 8, and those are prioritized. So the first is that maximum even flow of volume, district, geographic, then also the departure at the geographic. And then I can't remember all the other exact ones, but we're moving through them as we can. And the reason we did that was going, this is a lot of work. And in order to be able to get there, we need to, know the order that we're going to do it in as this kind of plays out, and what's the most important thing to know for the board to be able to have the discussion around this stuff.
So when you have the model results, can you talk about what data you'll provide, to kind of help with that greatest permanent value assessment?
Sure. Well, there's volume, habitat, carbon, these things, at the very high level. But then there's also, and this gets back to a little bit about what does the log supply look like over time. And there are log stock tables, of course, associated with the modeling outputs. And so having an estimate there of, what kinds of products might be coming off it. Now, getting back to, what is the saw log size look like over time with the implications for that.
You really compare that result, that kind of merchandised log table distribution with what you're currently selling?
I don't see why not. I mean, we know, we have the scale data on everything that currently comes off and our sales. So I'll look to Todd for that, but I think that's
I think that's something we could do. That's not something that we currently have implemented, but if that's would be of value, I think we could work to include that.
Seems like that'd be a valuable comparison, right? There's obviously a lot of interest in what log size is going to look like, under the different alternatives here.
Right.
That level of detail goes into the model, but that level of detail doesn't necessarily come out of the model. So we'd just be another piece we'd want to include in the post-processing.
Okay, so I know we're running behind time, but I know we've got, Mike, do you have anything else? Okay, sir, why don't you come to the table, please? And introduce yourself again. I appreciate that.
Bodie Dowding, Pack Fiber. So I think, Mike, you may have just answered my question, but my question was, does the model take into account different tree diameters and volume per acre when it's considering what it's going to get for stumpage and pond value? Because your pond values are obviously going to change with your different diameter classes. You have a sweet spot. And then it, decreases as you get larger. And then obviously your logging cost is less with your larger trees. So I was just wondering how the model took that into account.
I think I can address that. So the harvest planning model, so Patchworks as showed earlier, that includes at the harvest unit level, which are 60 to 100 acres in size. That includes estimates of the logging method, and then that integrates with the stocking as well as the size of the tree. So it takes into consideration so you get a very site-specific logging cost estimate from that, as well as other costs such as transportation costs, hauling costs. And then the merchandising, the pond values are based on a 10-year historical average at the species and grade level. So so saw logs and three sizes of saw logs for conifer, and then pulp, and then by species.
Thanks. I know it's probably deeper than you want to get into it, but obviously is for say a 2 mil, there could be basically an unlimited diameter for a 2 mils as long as it's got a certain size knots. And at some point that value is going to decrease quite a bit. So I don't know if you guys can think about that or look into it at all, but thank you, Todd.
Thanks for the question. I want to ask one question of Laura. I'm going to put Laura on the spot here. So looking at extended rotations, we've had lots of conversations with the department. They're talking about harvesting 80, 100, even up to 120-year-old trees. Can you give us what we currently have available as far as mills that can handle those size logs, and then look into the future 20, 30 years? Is that still going to be possible? And because of the location of mills that are able to handle larger logs, is it going to be cost effective for companies to haul these logs to the appropriate mill?
I wish Tyler was still here to answer these questions on behalf of the entire industry, but I'll do my best. So right now, Hampton, we do have one mill that can take a larger log in Tillamook. It's a hemlock mill, which there isn't a lot of large hemlock now or probably into the future. So that would, be something to consider there. We send our oversize that we buy from ODF sales to a few different places, usually down to Eugene, No Tie, or to Clatskanie, sometimes up to Longview as well, to different mills there. So they're traveling a lot. And I think that's something that is, not well understood, is the amount of logs that move around from one sale. So we might purchase a sale in Tillamook or in Astoria, but those logs are going to Washington mills, to Eugene mills. They're going all over to the hardwood mills. There's Cascade Hardwoods in Washington. That's a big ODF purchaser. They come down in Oregon, move their logs up. So these things are going around everywhere, which adds to your logging costs and your hauling costs and all of that. And so the less mills there are, the longer those distances will be. So just something to think about for the long term there. I don't know if that helps, but
I did mean to put you on the spot. Thank you for that. Commissioner Banks, quick question.
Yep, well, I think it's a quick one. So when we're talking about departure and we're talking about modeling, is the mentality to go into the HCAs the one time that you're allowed to go into and harvest as much as you can in that departure process? As part of the departure process, and then leaving the outliers outside of the HCAs for more of an even flow? Or is it we're not looking in the conservation areas at all in regards to this departure, and the conservation areas are going to be touched only sporadically throughout the years? Because I know there's a very limited window for touching those HCAs. And I was just wondering if you were going to try to front load it while we actually, might make a dent financially for communities.
So the timing for actual work in the HCAs is pretty explicit at this point. And it basically comes up to 7,500 acres over every 5 years in a combination of region and thinning harvest, if I'm doing my math right. But over the first 30 years of the HCP. For the departure scenario specifically, that's looking at the general landscape more so, and not really focusing on the HCAs as part of a departure. There's a couple of reasons to that. One is the scale, the timing of that is very set in the HCP, but then also we have limited knowledge on the volume that will actually come out of those prescriptions, just because they are there for habitat enhancement. And so the regeneration harvest and Swiss needle cast and alder stands, that's probably pretty easy to get to. It's really more around the healthy conifer thinning that will be done in there and what those volumes look like, because it's not a standard thinning for commercial purposes. It'll have gap creation, different variable density thinning. And so it's just harder to assess the actual volume outcomes there. So we're really not relying on that to answer the volume question with the modeling.
I guess I'm trying to recall the age maps in my head right now, and if there's too much departure, we're deeply dipping into our future pocket in regards to harvest. And so I guess it's going to just push the steep cliff out a couple years or maybe a decade. Because I'm just pulling up the age classes that I have in my head that are outside of the HCAs, and we don't have a lot to dip into. So.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go online very quickly. Anybody online have any questions, concerns at this point before we move on? We're running a little late. Mike, did you have something else?
Just a quick, I think previously at a meeting, Mike, you talked about how much departure is in the departure scenario. Is that, do you know that specification around departure?
No, we don't know that at this point because it's different. The way the HCP modeling made certain assumptions in the absence of a forest management plan. And so I think this is going to be a little bit freer, if you will, in terms of what it's allowed to do and seeing what that comes up with. Yeah.
All right. Are we pushing out the HCP decision in all of these conversations that are taking so much time? Or is the HCP decision still going to be made at the same time frame?
So we're still, we're working with the federal services and trying to stay on top of where they're at in their process for finalizing the NEPA process, finalizing BIOPS and all of that leads to incidental take permits. They're very interested in this work as well, as it affects their EIS and affects their biological opinions, both around take and around their own socioeconomic analysis that they did for the EIS. And so, you know, I don't have an answer for you on that today, but obviously the pace of our work affects the pace of their work at this point.
Okay, seeing no other questions. Again, I apologize for running this meeting long, but these are important discussions we're having. So next up, we're going to discuss the status of the AOP development. Colleen Kaiser. Colleen?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you.
Good.
Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. I'm going to get my PowerPoint up
Take
and
it
running.
away.
Just
Perfect.
1 second. All right. Well, good morning. Like I said, my name is Colleen Kaiser, and I'm the state forest planning manager. And I was asked today to give a quick update on the fiscal year 2024 draft annual operations plan. I am going to go through this kind of quickly just to be able to provide some room for questions. I think there's some other topics on the table, so I'm going to condense it a little bit. Before I get started, I wanted to just give a reminder of the types of operations that are included in our annual operations plan. These plans include the details of the planned timber harvest operations that are planned to be sold in the next fiscal year that runs from July 1st to June 30th of 2023 to, July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. There are both primary sales and alternate sales identified, and that go through the public comment period in order to have options in case any of the primary sales are unable to move forward, or to have options if adjustments are needed based on new information or changes in direction. Historically, these alternates are then used as primaries for the next fiscal year. In addition, these plans describe forest activities, including forest road management, reforestation and young stand management, recreation, and other restoration projects that will be completed during this time frame. Today, I'm just going to give a really quick high-level overview of the timber harvest operations, some information on roads and young stand management and recreation, and then we'll just talk about the next steps in the annual process. Now that I kind of gave that overview, I just want to start with the annual harvest table on the screen that shows the primary and alternate annual harvest breakdown by district. In the next slide, I will also go over the county by county breakdown of these same numbers, but I thought I'd start here. So the key numbers on this sheet, I'm hoping that everyone can see it well in the room. But the key numbers on this sheet are the planned total harvest volumes for the primaries and the alternate sales. The FY24 plan does follow the revised implementation plans, and they are set at the high end of the harvest volume ranges that were identified in those. The planned harvest volume of 186.5 million would be achieved through approximately 5,300 acres of clear cut and 4,800 acres of thinning, which is mostly occurring on the Klamath district, or at least a large part. I also included the planned sales that make up the alternate pool for a total volume of 102.3 million board feet. As I talked about earlier, historically, these alternates are then used as primaries for the next fiscal year, but they are also options in case any primary sales unable to move forward, or to give us options if adjustments are needed based on new information or changes in direction. Okay, I'm going to move over to the county slide. So here are the same numbers that I talked about on the previous slide, but it's broke down county by county. The counties listed above are those that have planned sales and planned volume coming from within their counties. I do know there's a lot of information on this slide, so I will just pause to see if there's any questions before I move on to the rest of the presentation. I just want to give you guys some time to kind of absorb it. We can send this out afterwards as well.
Thanks.
I'm just curious of the amount of harvested board feet in 2023 for a comparison for Clatsop.
Yeah, so I don't know 100% for the county breakdown, and that's something we would have to get back to you on. But I do know that the previous harvest level for the Astoria district was 73 million.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other questions on this?
I think you can move on.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the planned project work. We're planning to do approximately 300 miles of road improvement and another 25 miles of road construction, which is all planned to access the primary sales that we just talked about. So that 185.6 or 85.5 number. These roads will be a mix of timber sale associated projects and work order contracts. For those of you that may not be aware, a work order contract is where we do a separate contract for project work instead of including it with the timber sale. This allows for the project work to be completed prior to selling a timber sale, which has multiple potential benefits. So mix of both. Mostly they're timber sale associated, but there is a group of work order contracts this go around that will be detailed in the plans by district. Next, I'd like to talk about young stand management. There's approximately 5,000 acres of initial planting and about 2,000 acres of pre-commercial thinning. These numbers are lower than we've had in previous years. And there's basically two factors for that. One is some of the districts still have a large number of sales that are either active or have not yet been completed, so they weren't available for planting this year, or at least are not included in the plans for this year. And then also the North Cascade district, their reforestation acres are starting to settle back down after their post-Labor Day fire restoration efforts. They've had a lot of success there, and we're starting to see that level out. Another aspect of the annual operations plan is the work that is done by the recreation program. This work for fiscal year FY24 will be primarily focused on recreation facility operations and management, ongoing maintenance, project planning, and resolving issues where trails and timber sales interact, as well as ongoing projects from past annual operations plans. As you can see from this table, there are a few new projects. All of these new trails, as well as a number of bridge replacement projects, are occurring on the Tillamook district. And there are no new planned recreation projects for any of the other districts during this fiscal year, as the recreation staff will be focused on the priority work that I listed above. And I told you it would be really quick because I knew I had a short time and I wanted to leave time for questions. So I just wanted to go over the next steps for the annual operations plan. So we're currently, the staff is currently in the final stages of pulling together the draft documents, and we're expected to go to public comment late next week. We'll be holding a 45-day public comment period and hopefully finishing up the first week of June. Once that comment period is complete, the district foresters and staff will review the comments and consider the feedback to determine if any adjustments are needed. And with that, we're on track to finalize and approve the annual operations plan by June 30th, ensuring that the sale auction timeline is uninterrupted. And now with that, that's the really quick overview, and I just will see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Colleen. Questions? Mr. Banks?
So is this draft AOP based on the IPs, which are based on approval of an HCP that has yet to be approved?
It is.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no
that.
problem. Thank you.
Quickly, please.
A quick question. How many miles of recreation trail do we have on state lands?
Of course you would know that one or ask that one. I do not know off the top of my head. I know it's written down and I think I know exactly where it is. So if I can find that, I can drop it in the chat. If not, we can follow up afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
And Justin, please excuse me. I need to go back one, and I know we were going to try to discuss the current status of the IPs. Anybody like to address that issue at this point? Mike, could you?
Yeah, so the IPs, the approved IPs should be posted next week. We do need to get those posted so we can move forward with the draft AOPs. And I mean, that's the status of the IPs. You know, as we move through this process, and, you know, I realize there's a lot of, you know, different feelings around it, but one of the things that I would encourage folks to remember is that even once we have an IP approved, we have a considerable amount of flexibility in terms of, without even revising the IP, in terms of major and minor modifications to an IP. And that's our way, and always has been really our way, of being able to be responsive to new information. Part of which will, you know, may very well be informed by the modeling outputs for the FMP HCP as well. And so that's just something to keep in mind, or the issuance of ITPs. You know, obviously a lot of what we're dealing with now is still constrained too by the current survey pipeline, you know, just that compliance piece that we have to have. But then, you know, having ITPs in hand would change that as well. So anyway, that's the status of them.
Mike, I appreciate that. And that's a very unsatisfying answer to me. I mean, I know when these IPs first came out and we started talking about them, and after the last Board of Forestry meeting, we kept hearing that ongoing work was going to be done to try to increase harvest levels on these IPs. And at this point, I'm not hearing anything about that at all. And that is very concerning to me. So again, and a lot of people, I'm not gonna list names here. A lot of people have said that, yes, we're going to try to find additional harvest levels out of these IPs. And now I'm hearing that, well, we have flexibility once, and these IPs were approved. They'll be posted next week. But now all we're hearing is, well, we're not continuing to work on additional harvest levels in these IPs, but we have flexibility in the IPs once they are approved, and they have been approved. They're going to go into effect July 1. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that this is still extremely concerning to FTLAC and the Council of Forest Trust Land Counties. This is going to be devastating to the counties moving forward. And it's putting everyone in a very uncomfortable position. Okay, so sorry, I had to get that off my chest. No questions. Okay, So let's see if we can get through the discussion on stewardship agreements. Yes, Justin, please.
Great, thank you. So for the record, Justin Buttress, Policy Analyst for the State Forest Division. I'm just going to try to kind of quickly go through an overview of what stewardship agreements are, the process that we're going to go through with that, and hopefully, again, leave some time for some questions. So stewardship agreements are established in statute as a mechanism to allow landowners to enter into voluntary agreements with either the State Department of Agriculture or the State Board of Forestry or both, to establish terms under which that landowner will self-regulate to meet and exceed applicable regulatory requirements and achieve conservation, restoration, and improvement of fish and wildlife habitat or water quality. So that's kind of the overarching purpose of these agreements. They're specifically intended to provide incentives for landowners to provide conservation, restoration, and improvement of habitat or water quality, intended to be a mechanism to coordinate compliance across multiple regulatory schemes, federal and state, and a mechanism to combine or coordinate multiple incentive programs to improve effectiveness, improve conservation outcomes, and provide regulatory certainty. So any landowner that's seeking participation in the program must submit a management plan that provides a prescription for the protection of resources that exceeds land management practices, standards, and activities otherwise required by law, and that is designed to achieve conservation, restoration, and improvement of fish and wildlife habitat or water quality. The stewardship agreement can also identify specific voluntary actions that exceed regulatory requirements, and in return, either the Department of Agriculture or the State Board of Forestry or both can agree to exempt the landowner from future changes to a specific rule. So that's the regulatory certainty bit. So that's kind of the overarching overview. There's a lot more detail. If you want to look into the statute, it's ORS 541.973 for those of you that are following along at home. In terms of process, the department has promulgated administrative rule to implement that statute. You can find these in our Division 21 rules. So we'll have to prepare an application that will be reviewed and evaluated by the Forest Resources Division. So this isn't something that the State Forest Division gives itself. It's going to be one division preparing the application and those materials, submitting it to another division for review. The Forest Resources Division must review that application against a set of criteria that are established in OAR 629-021-0500 for sufficiency to evaluate whether or not that management plan is sufficient to have a stewardship agreement issued. If it's approved, the stewardship agreement is entered into, which creates a binding commitment to follow the prescriptions that are outlined within that management plan, along with monitoring commitments, and then there's audits by the Forest Resources Division for compliance to that agreement. The Board of Forestry in the Division 21 rules has also delegated authority to approve stewardship agreements to the state forester. As part of the process, there's a 21-day public comment period that's done before approval. And those agreements may be terminated based on failure to adhere to the agreement, violations of federal law, or failure to agree on amendments to the agreement that may result from audits. So that's sort of the overarching process. Specifically, what's in front of us really is to look at the FPA rules and as they're being amended by the Private Forest Accord, looking for differences between what we're doing now or maybe doing into the future, determining if those differences are significant and would be impactful to our operations and our management of the state forest lands. And then, that set of rules then would be the candidates for inclusion in the stewardship agreement. Won't likely seek or be given a wholesale exemption from the entirety of the FPA. It's really going to be looking at those rules that I just described where they cause impediments. And we're also able to demonstrate exceedance with what we're doing now. It's a necessary condition that you have to show exceedance over the current rule. And so finally, all harvest operations that are in progress or initiating after December 31st of this year must be fully compliant with the new FPA rules. So all of our timber sales that we have still on the books that haven't been completely hauled by December 31st will have to be made compliant in the absence of a stewardship agreement with the new FPA rules that go live on January 1. So that's the kind of the high level overview. Happy to answer any questions or hear any comments should you have any.
Thank you, Justin. Yes, Mr. Persinger.
Thank you, Commissioner Yamamoto. For the record, I was following along at home, so thank you for the ORS citation there.
Good.
You said in the Division 21 rules that the board has deferred approval of stewardship agreements to the state forester.
Has delegated, yes.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Correct.
Have they done that for 541-974, which is the grant fund piece?
I don't know the answer to that. The rule states that they delegate the approval.
Okay.
I would have to look at the grant approval part of that.
Okay. So 541-974 says that the State Board of Forestry shall administer a stewardship grant fund to provide grants from the fund to landowners who have entered into stewardship agreements. I guess, to be frank, what I'm slightly worried about here, Mike, is that the counties have mentioned numerous times that we will be financially impacted by the implementation of, well, quite a few things. But the department through 541-974 potentially has the ability to apply for grant funds to recoup some of their losses. So assuming I'm reading the statute correctly, I just wanted to flag that as something. So
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I appreciate that. You know, it's not really something that we've thought a whole lot about, and probably because the nexus to us would probably not be there in terms of what will be our management obligations anyway. You know, the grant funding there to help out, of course, the impetus for that is if somebody's doing a completely voluntary stewardship agreement under which they're not having to comply with something else, say an HCP, moving forward, it may be, oh, okay, how can we help you do that? For us, I don't think that we don't land in that same space, even though it doesn't maybe really define that there. But we haven't really considered that as part of our piece moving forward to apply for grants associated with it. It's more about just making sure that we have we remove any discord between new FPA rules and our management. But thank you for pointing that out.
I just quickly looked at Division 21. It doesn't reference the grant program at all. So we'll have to do a deeper dive into that offline and then hopefully get something back to you soon.
Thank you, Justin. Any other questions for Justin? Anyone online? But that looks like we may get done on time here. So upcoming FTLAC meetings. Brandon, I don't have a schedule for that. Do we have a schedule for upcoming FTLAC meetings? So the next one would be in preparation for the meeting of the Board of Forestry and Sisters, correct? Okay. So stand by for that. We'll be putting some dates together with the department on our FTLAC meeting. So closing remarks. Let's start online.
Sorry, Commissioner, our next FTLAC meeting is scheduled for Friday, May 26th,
Thank you.
which is approximately 2 weeks before that board meeting, second week of June.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to start online with any comments and any questions and any Closing remarks from anyone online? So Commissioner Pope, I think I saw your hand come up first.
Thank you. So I'm curious about whether or not we're going to have any comprehensive analysis or presentation on how all of these plans affect Forest Development Fund going forward. So I'm very interested to know how the agency survives over the next 5 to 10 years. And I've missed seeing that information. If it exists, Chair Yamamoto, I'd like to get it. If not, I'd certainly like for it to be on the agenda for the future. Hear a lot of talk from board members and about their concerns about this, and I'm yet to see those numbers and those projections. So if it exists, help me with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope. And yeah, I mean, we've been asking the same questions of the department, and I think we know where they're going to go. In the next biennium, they're going to go to the legislature. Anyone like to address that issue at this point?
So part of the, modeling that's being done and those outcomes will be the revenues to both projected revenues to both counties and to the FDF. And that's where the board will get their understanding. Where the conversation goes, I don't know. There was a bill in the legislature early on that got pulled. And honestly, I do not know exactly what processes folks might have in mind for us. But currently, we are not driving any particular process around additional funding. Although, we do occasionally ask for POPs to help fund recreation, or most recently education and interpretation, and those tend to go nowhere, even though it is a significant part, a significant expenditure for us around recreation.
Thank you for that, Mike. And Commissioner Pope, I know, we've had a lot of conversations about this, and one of my biggest concerns, well, I've got a lot of concerns about the department's budget. One of my biggest concerns is their ability to continue to fight fires in the state of Oregon. I have talked, every time I talk to the Board of Forestry, I mean, I tell them, I don't want anyone fighting fires in the state of Oregon other than ODF. They do just a terrific job at that. Come next biennium, when the department certainly could be sitting there with 30% less revenue coming out of timber harvest, and counties are going to be in the exact same boat, if not worse. But if they start to have layoffs, no, not if they start to have layoffs, when the department starts to have layoffs. If you come into this department during late summer, this department is a ghost town, because everyone in this department is somewhere on the fire lines or doing research or whatever it is they do to fight fires as effectively as they do. So that's one conversation I continue to have with the legislature. How is this department going to continue to fight fires moving forward if they have fewer people? And that's a big question to me. It is.
So with all due respect, Chair, again, I'm asking for the analysis question for FDF to be on our agenda and be on our agenda until we get answers. Again, we are squawking all as counties about the impacts, and we've been squawking that we want a true understanding and analysis of the economic impacts of the planning that these folks are presenting to us, and we're not getting that. So they ought to at least be able to give us an idea of their projections of revenue or of their costs, let's say that, over the next 5 years or 10 years, incorporated into this plan. I haven't heard an economic analysis for the agency with all this planning. So, with all of our needs, FDF is a big element in this as well. And if the plans that we're talking about are driving the agency into bankruptcy, that's a big deal, and we should understand it. So more dialogue is needed. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope. So Colleen, did you have your hand up earlier?
I just had a quick go back on the question that Commissioner Bangs asked. We have a total of 622 recreation trail miles, 476 are OHV, and 146 are non-motorized. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And my question was just in regards to how ODF thinks that they're going to continue to pay for all that. Piggybacking Commissioner Pope's comment, but then also I would like to know how ODF plans to staff their IMT teams after all of those layoffs also. So anyhow.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Banks. Anyone else online like to make a comment before we adjourn? Commissioner Magruder. I miss you here. You're not here. You should be sitting right next to me.
Well, I miss not being there, but just too many things to do. I just want to follow up with what Commissioner Pope said at our State Forest Advisory Committee meeting last week. I asked the same questions regarding funding. The staff at ODF, of course, is tasked with developing things like more trails, but they are not necessarily tasked with finding the funding for that. So I think that ODF has some very serious funding issues ahead of them, and I would second Commissioner Pope's request for some detail on that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Magruder. Anyone else online? How about in the room? Anyone? Commissioner Banks.
I have an off-topic question. I was provided an overview map of Jewel School District's HCA's over the permit area. And in that, in this little itty bitty living space is the owl circle that should have been delisted by ODF's own policies this most recent year because it's not surveyed an actual owl in over 5 years. But that's beside the point. I'm looking at all of these areas in red, and there are quite a few areas in red that have nothing to do with current habit or current FMP habitat protections. And it has teeny itty bitty little inoperable areas and giant red portions. And I was just wondering how far back ODF used surveys to try to develop this map. Hold it up, but nobody can zoom in. So
In terms of looking at habitat and species occurrence data, that went back quite a while. I don't have a specific date for you, sorry. As an indication of where species have occurred and habitat that was tended to be used, and evaluating what forest stands might be valuable habitat versus others.
and was that along with everything in the state and every map and every school district and every taxing district, is that went back quite a bit continuous across the landscape? Or was that special for Jewel School District because of the premium trees that we have in Jewel School District?
That would have been across the landscape, and that was a general principle, not targeted at any specific geographic area in terms of a difference there in weighing the value of species occurrence data.
I would really like a more specific answer than quite a ways back. Just in the future, if possible, we could get that information on what quite a ways back means. Just in consideration to the horrible negative impact that this is going to have on Jewel School District.
Commissioner, anyone else in the room? So I just want to make a quick comment here, and Chair Kelly, I'll get to you next and let you make any final comments that you want to make. But so far, I'm a little disappointed in the lack of movement I see from the department based on the current IPs and the huge economic impact it's going to have. So I know the SDAO, Special Districts Association of Oregon, is now on this. They're having conversations with all of their special districts, especially in the trust counties. explaining that, things are going to be difficult. I addressed the Neocon School District last week, as a matter of fact, telling them that things may look rosy today, but beware, things are gonna start changing very quickly. So all of our special districts are becoming aware of this. Our county, I just got through with 3 full days of budget hearings in Tillamook County, and they were not happy. Happy discussions, they were not. So, we continue to struggle moving forward. We don't want to have to continue to struggle through all of this. We don't. The financial impacts on the county's special districts and on the department are something that we should not just push down the road, because we can't. The counties and special districts are not pushing this down the road because we cannot. We have to balance our budgets. We have to know where every penny is coming from and where every penny is going. We're required by law to have balanced budgets. State is the same way. I'm not sure that applies to all departments within the state. I'm concerned for the Department of Forestry. So with that, I'll call it quits. Chair Kelly, any final comments?
Sure, thank you, Chair Yamamoto. I would just want to say that obviously in my role, I'm share some of the same concerns, particularly about where we are going financially. And so we will be eagerly, I think the whole board will be eagerly awaiting to see good numbers. And we have all been waiting for quite a while on that. So that'll be a great thing. I just also want to assure everyone that I am listening intently to all of the comments and just want you to all know that every comment is being noted and no one is being ignored. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for that, Chair Kelly. With hearing no further questions, concerns, time being 12:07 p.m. We will adjourn this FTLAC meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We had great representation by the counties today. Thank you.